with you, and we hope that this training will be helpful. So Marissa, can you go ahead and put up the slide deck for us? While she's doing that, I'll just briefly go over our agenda for our hour together. So one of the things that we like to start out with is just an introduction. So what we'll do after I go through just a couple of points here is we'll go around our virtual room and talk about ourselves and what committee you're sitting on, if you know the name of the review panel that you're sitting on. And then if you are someone who hasn't read for us before in the past, if you could kindly tell us why you got interested in reviewing. And then we'll also have you talk about, if you're a returning reviewer, what advice you would have for us newbies that are part of the room. So we'll also be doing an overview of the Community Foundation and discussing how to review the grants through our online portal, as well as how to evaluate the grant applications. And then we'll start talking to you about what to expect from the actual review meeting. So that way you go into that meeting, know exactly what's expected. And then we'll also have question and answer at the end. That by no means that you have to wait till the end of our conversation to ask questions. So if things come up, if anything's unclear, feel free to take yourself off mute and ask away. So with that, let's go ahead and do a quick round robin of introductions. So I will just call on people. So Jamie, would you mind starting us off?
No, I'd be delighted to. Thank you. My name is Jamie Wolf. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the chair of Trans Central Coast, a group here in the county that supports transgender and non-binary people. And I'm a member of the advisory committee for the Growing Together Fund. And I think this will be my third time, I think, reviewing grants. I enjoy it just because I like to know what's going on out there and see what people are doing. You know, the advice I would give is to not get too worried about it and just sit down and read them all and not read them really carefully. I just read through them, and then it becomes pretty clear, for me anyway, it's become really clear as sort of where I want to go back, where I need to go back and look at things.
Wonderful, thank you. Grenda, can you go next?
Yes. Hi, I'm Grenda Ernst, and I am on the board of the Community Foundation, and I'm the liaison to the Women's Legacy Fund. And I thought it would enhance my understanding and my ability to be a good liaison to do some grant review. I've reviewed grants twice in the past, but it was some time ago, and I suspect that the process has changed, for one thing. And then for another, like Jamie, I want to know what's going on. I think it's a good way to find out what's happening in the community and how the community is relating to us and vice versa.
Wonderful, thank you, Grenda. Tom?
Yeah, I'm Tom Ammon. I just joined a while ago on the Growing Together Fund. Jamie recruited me for that. And so we met, she told me about it, and it sounds like something I really enjoy doing. So I'm looking forward to reading some of the grants.
Wonderful, thank you. Wendy?
Hi, everyone. It's a thrill to be here, I have to say. I'm Wendy Wendt. I'm the executive director at First 5 San Luis Obispo County, and I'm going to be reading applications for the Women's Legacy Fund round this year. I know there are connections certainly with my work at First 5, which is an agency that focuses on the needs of children and families prenatal to 5 years old. This year, I know that there's a sub-focus on childcare as part of the Women's Legacy Fund grant program. And I'm also just a huge fan and long-term cousin within the Community Foundation family. It's really great to meet Jamie and Tom in particular. I started my relationship with the Community Foundation when I was an independent contractor and did some work on the Growing Together initiative years ago, 2003. So it's just wonderful to come around full circle and be a grant reader. I've not read grants for the foundation before, but at one point about 10 years ago, I was working on a project with the foundation that eventually moved into the Youth Pathways Fund. And so I was very connected to the grant making activities on that project years ago. And so I'm somewhat familiar, although not with the kind of updated version of the story. So thank you, Jamie, for the advice. I think it's good advice on how to take a look at grants, and I'm excited to be a part of the process.
Wonderful. Thank you, Wendy. And Forrest.
Yeah, I'm Forrest Eastham, and I will be a volunteer reviewer on the Giving Together Fund. Actually, Alicia recruited me and suggested that I might like to try reviewing some grant proposals, and reminded me that I've been actually wanting to do it for roughly the last 3 years that I've lived here. So really excited to be here.
Great. All right, Ken.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, amazing. I'm Ken Walker. I have no idea what I'm doing here. I was recommended to read grants. I'm a retired philosophy instructor, professor, emeritus. I'm here to learn what to do and how to do it and what I'm reading for and what the criteria are. I'm here to be informed.
Wonderful. And you came highly recommended by one of our beloved grant making committee members. So happy to share more.
She just doesn't know me very well.
I doubt that. Barry?
Yes, hi everybody. Barry Johnson. I work with Transitions Mental Health Association. I'm the director of education and advocacy programs there. This is probably my third or fourth round of reading for the Growing Together Fund, and similar advice or just heads up, I guess, is that you're going to learn a lot about the community. But what's great is you learn a lot about your fellow grant reviewers as well, and just the collaborative process. And I always look forward to that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Marcy?
Hi, everyone. My name is Marcy Maloney. And as Ken's mentioned, I got recommended by Pat, and I don't know much about this process, but I've just recently retired from Cal Poly as the executive director for ASI. I was at Cal Poly for 31 years. Before that, I was a business owner in town back in the 80s. So I've been around for over 45 some odd years. It's been absolutely crazy that time flies by so fast. I'm really interested in giving back to the community. I raised my 3 children here. And one of my first jobs was actually in youth sports, working for the city of San Luis Obispo.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And Edie?
Oh, I'm sorry I got on the call late. I was reading the wrong email and trying to get on a Microsoft Teams meeting. I had it mixed up. I'm Edie Likey, and I think this is my 3rd time reviewing grants with Community Foundation. I like participating because I like learning about the organizations in our community and all the great work that they're doing. And I guess the only advice I would offer to new reviewers is don't wait till the last minute. I like to read all the grants over one time and just kind of let it percolate in my brain for a few days before I have to read them again and then start really deciding how to prioritize. Glad to be here.
Thank you. And now I get to introduce you to our amazing staff. Mary?
Hi, everybody. So I am the Scholarships and Grants Coordinator, and I've been here at the Community Foundation for about 6 months. And I have to say, I really enjoy this process. We did some grants when I first came on staff in the fall, and I just loved hearing the perspective of different people in the community and what they get out of the applications. So I'm really, really happy to be here with all of y'all.
Wonderful. And Mary works really closely with the Janssen Foundation Fund for those that are reading for that. And Alicia?
Hi, folks. Welcome. My name is Alicia Krupski. I am the Field of Interest Program Associate here at the Foundation. I staff the Women's Legacy Fund and the Growing Together Fund. I've been with the Foundation a little over a year, but this is actually my first time doing the grant review process, and I'm thrilled to be here.
Great. And last but not least, Marissa.
Hi, I'm Marissa. I'm the program assistant for the scholarships and grants program. Similar to Mary, I've been here for about 6 months as well. And one of our first, I did grants first, so it's really interesting to be a part of it. I'm excited to see what this round holds.
Thank you. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the orientation. Hopefully that advice from some of our seasoned grant makers or grant reviewers can be really helpful. I know that we can say it, but sometimes it's helpful hearing that from other folks as well. So Marissa, would you go ahead and advance to the next slide? So what is the Community Foundation? So I know that some of you have been involved with the Community Foundation since the early days, and some of you serve in different capacities, and others, this might be the first time that you've collaborated with the Community Foundation. So the Community Foundation was established almost 25 years ago. We're coming up on our 25th celebration next year. And since 1998, we have awarded more than $37 million in scholarships and grants. And our assets under management are now about 77 million. Each year we award anywhere between $2.5 to $6 million. And you are part of that process of helping us make community informed decisions. So thank you also so much for volunteering your time. Next up, I'll pass it off to Alicia, who will talk about Women's Legacy Fund.
Thank you, Cassandra. So the Women's Legacy Fund was established to be a catalyst for philanthropy that improves the lives of women and girls in San Luis Obispo County. One of the things that the fund does is produce a report every 5 years called What Do Women Need? Which signals the needs in the community for women and girls. This report, by and large, helps inform the funding priorities for our grant review process, grant making process. Over the past 2 years, we've had 2 different focuses. One has been girls' mental health. Some examples of that could be self-care, chronic sadness, addressing bullying and harassment, and internet safety. The other program that we support with our funding is women's financial stability. So some examples of that would be financial literacy, education, economic independence, support for Latinas, income disparity, food security, senior support, and housing stability. This year, the fund is introducing one more priority that's pretty exciting. It is childcare. This is a priority that has been an emerging need in the community throughout the pandemic, and was also highlighted in the What Do Women Need report as well. Next slide. So Growing Together Fund, this is a fund that supports the LGBTQ+ community here in San Luis Obispo. Excuse me. So this fund has a set of new priorities that we're excited to announce this year. So the fund will prioritize grant proposals to grow and implement projects that demonstrate strategies to reach out to, involve, and center queer and trans people of color. Second priority will be to focus on advancing medical and mental health care for transgender and non-binary individuals. And then the third priority will be to create queer spaces in currently underserved areas of the county. And I will pass it on to Mary to talk about Janssen Youth and Youth Sports.
Sorry about that. So the purpose of the Janssen H Foundation Youth and Youth Sports Fund is to provide support for local nonprofits in the area who primarily focus or who totally focus on youth. And in this fund, it's not focused on education, it's youth activities. And one of the main things is they really want to encourage young people to do sports and to be active in sports. But knowing what I think is wonderful about this fund is that not all kids like sports. So instead they do support other youth enrichment activities, like possibly music or anything else that gets kids moving and growing and learning in the community that is not education. And then the other thing that's really important about this is that the preference is on direct services cost. This isn't about overhead. It's not about administration. The money needs to go to the student or to the kids involved as much as possible. And the maximum grant size for this is $5,000.
Thank you. So we have a lot more to share with you, but are there any questions so far about our grant making priorities? Okay, Marissa.
So I will be your go-to person for all the portal questions you might have, but we're also going to cover a few things in this section. So we'll be going over logging in and resetting your password, navigating the online portal, navigating your assigned applications, and then also a couple helpful tips that we've learned over the years. So following this meeting, you'll all receive an email with the link to the online grant application. And then once you open the link, just for some reason it auto sets to the middle of the page. So just make sure you scroll up and you'll have the login option, which will be in the top right-hand corner. And then we'll prompt you to this page. In the email, you'll also receive temporary login credentials if you're a new user. And if you're a continuing user, you can go ahead and just use your usual credentials to log in. If you have any trouble with this, feel free to reach out. I can always help you reset on my end as well. And then when you do get the temporary credentials, go ahead and just go to your drop-down menu in the top right-hand corner. This will allow you to change your password to a more unique password. We prefer you do that so you don't just have ours that we're sending out. And then once you're in the portal, there'll be a menu that will list the programs that you're assigned to. You should all just have one. I have them all listed on my account just so I can see and show you guys. And then once you're there, you'll go ahead and click onto the program. And then this will bring you to a list of applicants or applications. And just make sure you click on the applicant's name to see the actual application itself. And then this will break it down. This just allows you to track your progress. So it'll have the percentage complete. Once you've reviewed all the questions and answered them all, that should show 100%. The scoring column will show you the score that you've given each application. And there's also a scoring comment. It's not required, but it's super helpful. And Cassandra will talk about that a little later, but that will pop up here. And then once you're in your assigned applications, on the left-hand side, you'll have the actual scorecard. And then on the right-hand side will be the application. And if you want to download the application, you can. So if you click on View Application, that will just pull up the application in a new link on a different web page. But if you do the reviewer PDF, that will download the application for you as a PDF. And then the reviewer scorecard will also download the scorecard as a PDF for you. And you'll need to make sure to score each section. It'll have a drop-down menu for each one. And you'll just go ahead and do that. And then this little orange tool will allow you to expand both section sides. So you can pull it to the right to expand the scorecard and pull it to the left to expand the application itself. And then this is, we're going through some helpful tips. Again, this is just a reminder. It will sometimes automatically go to the center of the page, so the login button won't be visibly there. So you'll just have to scroll up and make sure you can see it. And you need to use the toolbar to navigate throughout the dashboard. For some reason, the back buttons on the portal will just exit you out of the page. So just make sure you're using this to jump back and forth between the different applications. Again, finding your preferred reviewing method. So just to reiterate, the view application will open the application in a separate window on your internet browser, and the reviewer PDF and reviewer scorecard will open it and download it onto your computer as a PDF. And as a reminder, the orange navigation tool will allow you to expand each section just to make it a little bit easier for you to see. And then there's also a section in the applications of mandatory attachments that the applicants had to attach. So by clicking on this, it'll download onto your computer so you can see each of the attachments. And then towards the end, if you want to go ahead and condense all of the information, so the applicant's information as well as the scores, you can export that to an Excel so you can see it a little bit more easy. And then if you have any questions, feel free to call or email me and I can help you out with the portal.
The next that we're going to be doing is going into the nuts and bolts of how to evaluate the applications, which is sometimes very difficult because each year we receive far more applications than we have funding for. So my hope is that this section will provide you with some useful tools so that way you can feel good about the evaluations and then also know what to expect from the day of our meeting when we come together either virtually or in person, depending on your committee, to review the applications. So after this meeting, you'll be getting an email from me that will have the agenda for our evaluation meeting. It'll also have a summary that Marissa put together of funding history. So if an organization applied for funding and received grants from us in the past 3 years, you'll see a comprehensive list of that. You'll also have the full funding roster, which includes the list of all of the different applicants. So what we try and do is just front load you with information so that we have it all at your fingertips. So then after this meeting and you get that email, you'll log in like Marissa said, and you'll see our online application. And our online application is really broken into 4 different parts. So the first is the applicant information. So this is kind of like a profile of the individual that applied for the grant and background on the organization that they work for. The program narrative will provide you with more information as to what they're wanting to do in this project. And then the attachments will provide you with more context on who's on the board, as well as some information about the budget. The terms and conditions statement, you can actually ignore. No need to evaluate that. That is a contract between us and the applicant, so that way we can issue them money. So they're just saying, yes, I promise I'll submit a grant report to you in a year. So next, what I want to do is just go into the different categories for evaluating the applicants. So each one of the categories I'm about to go through is worth a total of 5 points, 5 being the maximum in each category. So the first is fit. And what fit is really that the application matches the funding priorities. And this is really the first cut. So you want to make sure that whatever they're applying for funding is a match for the grant funding. If it's not, then it's most likely not going to receive a grant from us. A competitive application should have about a 4 or 5 in order to be considered for funding. And really the applications fall under 3 different categories. The first is well written and a great idea. And those ones are really easy to evaluate for because they're well written and what they're doing is just really needed in the community. The second is well written, bad idea. These ones can be a little bit of a trap because it sounds really good, but it's not really going to have a lot of impact in the community. And the last one is poorly written, great idea. And this could be an emerging nonprofit that is doing something really incredible, but maybe doesn't have the same level of experience in grant writing than a professional staff member would at a larger organization. So just kind of think of those 3 different types of nonprofits as we're walking through these evaluations. But first is fit. So does the application meet the minimum requirements for funding? And is it a strategic application? So after that, we're going to talk about organization capacity. So what was that?
Sorry.
No problem. Okay, so next is organization. So does the organization have the capacity to carry out what it is that they're wanting to do? So an idea is behind this, does the staff have the experience? So a long time ago, I rated an application pretty low in this area because it was an excellent nonprofit wanting to provide therapy. So there's definitely a need in the community to provide therapy to youth, but the staff didn't have the experience or the training to carry out that. And so it was rated low. So it rated high everywhere else, but rated low in organization. So that's one of the ways to tease that out here. We can go to our next one. Our next one is need. So the foundation really prides itself in using data to make informed decisions. So several of the funds that we had mentioned earlier utilize different studies in order to inform what the grant priorities are. So we had mentioned Women's Legacy Fund does a What Do Women Need report. So within the application, one of the things to keep an eye out for, and what would be an application that scores a 5, is if they utilize data to inform the need that they're seeing in the community. They can use our own data, such as one of our reports, or maybe they have something that they use as an agency that helps identify what those needs are. But utilizing data to inform the process is really helpful. So that's something that I would look for in need. Where is there a gap in services? Where are there organizations wanting to serve that need? And how is it informed? Next slide. The effective results. So this one is really talking about, so you've got this great idea, there's huge need in the community. So what are like the belts and suspenders of how the work is going to get done? So do they talk about their objectives, their time frame for how they're going to do it? How is it realistic? How is this actually going to be accomplished? So this is that portion of the evaluation. So 5 would be, they demonstrate that really well. 1 would be less so. One of the funds that I want to highlight is Women's Legacy Fund, because they offer 2-year grants. And so underneath this category, I would be evaluating, why is the proposed project a 1-year plan or a 2-year plan? So if they're applying for 2 years, what makes it so that I need to fund 2 years? And one of that could be 1 year is for planning because it's a new project, and the second year would be for implementation. So that's what I would be looking for in this part of the application. Next slide. So budget. Budgets is often the area that people feel the most uncomfortable evaluating. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about what to look for, what not to do, and we can chat about it. So one of the analogies that I always like to talk about is ordering a latte from Starbucks. So when you go to Starbucks, you give the barista money because you want a latte, $5. What we don't want to get in the habit of doing is drilling the barista and asking, why is it this much? How much is the cost of milk? And like essentially like nickel and diming the barista, like, oh, this is the cost. That's the approach that the foundation takes when evaluating budgets. So long as the budget is grounded in reality, we're not going to get in the micromanagement of like, does this make sense for this project? One of the reasons why it's really hard in evaluating grant proposals to not nickel and dime the latte is because a lot of times the grants that we're reviewing for, we will never be the recipient of. So imagine spending your life buying a latte for someone else and never knowing if it tastes good. So that is essentially what we're doing when we're evaluating grants. And so there's other things that we can look for to be able to determine that. So I would stay away from overly critiquing line items. Another thing that I would recommend not doing is partial funding temptation. This is really, really common because we have only so much money to give away, and we always have way more applications than we can fund. So it can be really tempting to partially fund an application. And my recommendation would be to do this as little as possible. And the reason why is most of the time when organizations are applying for funding, they need that amount of money in order to carry the project out. And what we don't want to have happen is have an organization apply for funding and we partially fund it to such an extreme that they can't actually carry out the work. So that's one of the things that we'll be talking about too. So when possible, fully fund. If we do have to partially fund, we'll talk about that as a committee to make sure that the work can actually happen. Another thing to stay away from is calculating the grant amount before the meeting. So don't worry when you're reviewing by yourself on creating a budget and doing allocations. That's actually something that we'll do during the review process. So you can stay away from that. So now I talked a lot about what to not do with a budget. Here's what to do. So when evaluating a budget, make sure it's grounded in reality. that it makes sense within the larger scope of what they're wanting to do. Sometimes when I take a look at a budget, I'm really curious as to, is this the only dollar to make the project or program happening, or are there other dollars that are coming in to support that? I'll take a look at if they're secured or where that money is coming from. Sometimes when looking at budgets, I'll also kind of eyeball how much of a priority is that for the board. So those are some of the things I look at when looking at a budget. Okay, next slide. The collaboration. So it's in the foundation's DNA. This is one of our core values, is collaboration. So of course it comes up for us as the area that we're evaluating when reviewing grant applications. When possible, we love to see collaboration within our grant applications. So for example, if an agency was doing something in youth arts, if they were collaborating with other nonprofits to help source those students, so maybe it's a school or maybe it's something else in the community, how do students find out about this program? Are they collaborating with other nonprofits in the community? Those types of things. So in some cases, collaboration isn't necessary for the project, but this is something that I think is really in alignment with the foundation's values. So we also have up to 5 points that can be scored for a collaboration as well. All right. So additional considerations, again, does the request make sense for the organization? So sometimes, and this makes sense, I've been on both sides of applying for grants and also reviewing grants. So sometimes when applying for grants, we need money. So we're going to stretch our mission in order to accomplish something. That's not something that we want to do with our grant funding. We're really making sure that it makes sense for the organization. We want this to be good. We want to be a good strategic partner for our grantees. Another consideration is width versus depth. So this is something that will likely come up in your review committee. It's, do we want to serve a lot of individuals? So maybe there's an application that serves 200 individuals versus another application that serves maybe 10, but it has a lot of depth. Maybe this is life-changing. What do you do? Serve a lot of people or a smaller amount of people that's life-changing? And there isn't a correct answer to this. But I think it is something to be mindful of. When we meet, we'll be talking about this a little bit. And I think at the end of the day, when we look at all of the different applications that we're funding, we actually want to mix. We want to be able to have width and depth. It's not necessarily either or. So we'll have some funded grant applications that do both. The last one is demonstrated leadership capacities. So this again goes back to the earlier point about the organization being set up to be successful in this. They've got the staffing in place. They have the experience to be able to carry out whatever it is that they're wanting to do. Okay, next. Are there any questions about this component? Jamie.
Cassandra, do you ever screen applications if one comes in that just is really a loser? Do you ever not put it in the process, or do we just forward it into us without comment?
So it's a little bit of both. So Marissa and I do some screening ahead of time, and I really appreciate that question. So one is Marissa's screening to make sure that it's a 501c in good standing. So there's this database that all nonprofits belong to called GuideStar. So she's double checking to make sure that they've done all their legal paperwork and they're in good standing with the IRS. So that's being screened. And then on the other side, I'll look through the applications and ensure that they're in a region. We get a lot of applications from the Bay Area for some reason. We must be on some database. So I'll screen those out. And then I'll also do some light screening to make sure that it's within the funding priorities, but it's very light because I don't want to get in the way of your process. So there is a little bit of that does go into this. Any other questions? Okay, so now we'll talk about what to expect on the day of the evaluation meeting. So I've served on a lot of committees in the past, and one of the things that I hate is showing up for something, having no idea what the flow of the day is going to be like. So we're going to tell you exactly what to expect of the meeting. So can you go to the next slide, Marissa? So one is we're going to ask you for 2 favors. One is please submit your evaluations 1 day in advance of our meeting. Marissa is going to be sending you lots of reminder emails about this. We utilize your scores to help facilitate the meeting. This year, we received a record number of applications, so having access to your scores will help us better facilitate your time. Second is if you have any burning questions, please make sure to ask those questions in advance. Don't wait till the day before the meeting to ask them well in advance. Because we would hate for you to have a burning question that we could have answered ahead of time that maybe prevented you from feeling comfortable or feeling like you're making good decisions. So that happens the day before. The day of the meeting, what we'll do is we're going to share with you how the score is fleshed out. And this is something that we found to be really helpful with facilitating the discussion. So staff will categorize the grant applications into 3 different areas. So, and this is fully based on your scores. So the first part will be the ones that are in the green. These are the ones that rate the highest. Second will be ones that are in the yellow, the ones that maybe weren't as competitive. And then lastly will be the red. Depending on the grants that you're reviewing for, we might actually spend most of the conversation in the greens and the yellows and not have a conversation about the reds. For example, the Janssen Youth Fund, that one received well over 20 applications, so we won't be able to talk about all of the ones that aren't competitive. So we'll just utilize this as a facilitation tool. You'll have every opportunity if you want to advocate for a grant application to talk about it. So if there is one that rated really low, but it has your heart, we'll make time for that as well. But having those scores ahead of time is just a huge time saver for us. So what we'll do is we'll start from the top of the list and just work down. And we're going to talk about what we liked in the application, anything that gave us room for pause. We'll talk about them. Only after we go through the entire list and everybody talks about the applications, only then do we start having a conversation about dollar amounts. That's the last thing that we do. So we have the conversation first, and then we'll figure out how to fund the things that we want to fund. It really throws the committee off if we get into dollars first without having the full conversation. So especially with working remote, these are some of the things that we found to be more successful. Next slide, please. So again, we'll talk about the applications and then we'll recommend funding amounts. We always have this section in our agenda where we're going to step back and go, what might be missing? So some of the things that we might talk about is how are we doing with serving North County versus South County versus Flow City? What's that funding spread look like? Another thing that we might talk about is that width versus depth. So are we serving a lot of people or not a lot? And we're doing in-depth services to a few people. So we'll have that discussion. And then what we'll do is we'll finalize our funding recommendations. At the end of the agenda, we'll have the speak now or forever hold your peace part of our discussion. And this is really important because our goal is not that your top organizations get fully funded. That is not our goal. Our goal is that you feel really good about the process and that you felt like your decisions and your evaluation was heard and respected. We want you to feel really good about the process. I can't guarantee that your top choices will be funded, but I really want to make sure that you feel good about the process. So we embed that into our agenda to have that discussion. So that's the finalized speak now or forever hold your peace part of our conversation. Next slide. So then we make our recommendations. So then there's a whole process that happens behind the scenes after that. So after we come together, make the recommendations, it goes to a bunch of other different entities to review. So the conversation that we have, our recommendations, those are all held as confidential. So the very first thing that happens for some of our recommendations is if there's an advisory committee that oversees it, those recommendations are sent before the advisory committee. We talk about them again, and then the advisory committee makes a vote to approve. After that, they go to the grant making committee, which is a subcommittee of our board, and we do essentially the same thing. Then they go to the board for board final approval. So what I have to say is that in my experience of working at community foundations, I have never seen a recommendation not be approved, but I have seen is questions come through. And so what that shows is that all of the committees really appreciate and trust this process, but we do have our lockstep process as far as approvals go. So that's one of the reasons why it's important to keep our recommendations confidential. Then in mid-May, our grantees will be notified via email. We will be sending them notes on if they were awarded, and if they were declined a grant, we will include in that declination email an opportunity to request feedback. So one of the things that's really helpful for me is in your evaluation at the very end, there's a comment box. So chances are we won't be able to talk about all of the different applications just because we received so many. So it's really helpful for me is to be able to read your notes. There's only one comment box. So if you could leave a note on what you thought was a strength of it, any red flags that you had, that's super helpful to me. By no means do you have to write like a essay or anything like that, but even just a quick sentence can be truly helpful. So that way I can give that feedback. And then all of our applicants are either on a 1-year grant cycle or a 2-year grant period. So at the culminating, after they've spent all of their funding, we ask for a grant report. And so that's like the very final thing that happens. And so those are available if folks want to read them as well. So next slide. Are there any questions about anything that we just covered? I know that was a bit like getting the fire hose and grant review, but I hope that this was helpful as far as understanding what the in-person review process would be like, as well as how we evaluate grant applications at the foundation. Any questions?
Could you repeat all that?
I'll send you the video recording. Any other questions? Nope. Okay, well, you've got a great team here. If you have technical questions, please email Marissa. If you have questions about the priorities, if it's for Women's Legacy Fund or Growing Together, Alicia is your person. For Jansen Foundation, Mary is your person. If you're super lost and don't know where to go, you can always get a hold of me too. But this is a great group and it's such a delight to get to work with all of you. And you'll be receiving an email from me shortly with how to start reviewing the grant application.